So, as Nikki said, the series is called X Cities, and the X is sort of evoking Studio X, but it's also a way of thinking about where smart cities are emerging at the intersection of global urbanization in the 21st century and the spread of ubiquitous computing all over the world. And those two things sort of being the big trends that are going to define the next century of city building. A lot of what we've been trying to do is bust myths. So we had a speaker come in, Sean Gorman, who has been for the last 10 years working in big data and exploring some of the real serious challenges around how you create big data, how you analyze it, how you open it up and share it, and all of his experiences. We had two speakers come in, one from IBM, Guru Banavar, who built the control center for Rio, which is basically measuring and helping to control an entire city. And Leif Percival from Public Laboratory here in New York, who's trying to think about ways that you sense cities from the bottom up and control them from the bottom up by giving people information that can help them change their behavior rather than coercing them or doing things invisibly on their behalf. And then last week, we had a session which I think leads right into what we're trying to do this week. We had two business executives, one from Living Planet in Portugal and one from Musongo City in Korea, both of which are ventures that are trying to simultaneously build new cities and create urban operating systems that will power them and allow new kinds of digital experiences to be deployed within them. And I think that the thing that we left that conversation with was that they have absolutely no idea what people want to layer on top of these urban operating systems, what kind of applications. They're sort of taking, it's even less sophisticated than the Apple App Store. At least Apple threw out a couple apps when they launched the iPhone and said, yeah, this is what this platform is going to be used for. These guys are just putting the platform in place and trying to figure out a business model that they can extract revenue from developers and from users without really knowing what we want to use it for. So the reason why I asked Hannah and Jake to come this last session is because they have been working a lot over the last few years thinking, critiquing, doing around how you create apps, civic apps that actually engage people. And I'll ask Hannah to come up first in a moment, but I met her only tonight, but recently came across the amazing writing she's been doing for Fast Company, looking at sort of New York's digital deficiency and all of the shortcomings of the way that New York City has approached building civic apps, and then trying to look for other cities, most recently Boston, and trying to find cities that are actually taking a more proactive approach. So Hannah Shank is principal of Collective User Experience, which is a user experience design shop here in New York, and she writes for Fast Company, has a long history of writing. So I'll ask Hannah to come up, please. We can use this. I have a bunch of grab.
Nice work. Hi. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about user-centered NYC. As was just said, I was asked to come here today because of an article that I wrote called New York City's Digital Deficiency. And it was basically about how New York isn't going to become a digital city anytime soon if they continue on the path that they seem to be on. And I felt qualified to write this article for two reasons. One is that, as was just said, I run a company called Collective UX. We are a user experience consultancy. And what that means is that we work with companies to help them understand what users' needs and goals are, and to ensure that their sites and their apps meet those needs and goals. What that looks like is basically this. We make a lot of things that look like this. These are wireframes, sitemaps, flows. This is kind of, I live in this sort of world. So the other reason that I wrote the article is that in addition to being a designer, when it comes to New York, I'm also a user. So I live this stuff every day, and when you're a designer and you start seeing, you start seeing UX issues all around the world. So you see parking signs that don't make any sense, and you see doors that don't open properly. You see subway maps that you wish you could rework a little bit. For me, I have my own goals and needs when it comes to New York, and right now, my needs and goals aren't being met. I am basically the person who has been waiting for the L train for 62 minutes. So I want to start today, this is cut, with an offline example. I think that for people who work in digital, it's very, the digital, talking about digital examples kind of can be very emotional, and the offline stuff are things that people experience every single day, walking down the street. So the other day, I took the train to the plane. And I always feel very virtuous when I take the train to the plane, like I'm doing this civic duty because they tell you to do it. So I live near the A train, so I took it to the air train. And I have this experience pretty much every time I take the air train, which is I get off at the station and what I see is this. So you come out out of the A train station into the air train station, and you're sort of looking down, and 9 times out of 10 you see your train arriving into the station. And what then happens is you sort of have this mad dash where you're going to take a plane, so you've got your bags and you're trying to find your Metro card, and possibly you're traveling with 87 children. So there's sort of this race to the train. And in this case, I made it. So I was excited, and then I always have this experience where I get on and I think, I have no idea where I'm going. I know that I'm going to, say, JetBlue, but I never remember what terminal that is. So this is actually a picture taken from the closest possible seat to the sign that tells you where to get off if you want, to where to find your plane. And you can see that it's totally illegible, and also there are already people who are standing there trying to figure out where they're going. So, to me, this is basically a UX fail. In addition to that, it's sort of complicated by the fact that I'm in airport world. So I have no larger sense of where I'm going. I've gotten on station A. I'm headed toward Federal Circle, which isn't a real place. This map also doesn't give me any guidance as to where I should be going. I'm taking a train that says it's probably says it's going to Jamaica, and I don't want to be going to Jamaica. I want to be going to some terminal that I haven't figured out yet. In any event, it doesn't work. So what could have happened to make this a better experience? So I'm going to talk about these 3 key principles for user-centered design. The first one is talk to your users. Who are they and what are they trying to accomplish? In this case, I have a really simple goal. I'm trying to get to my plane. 2, look at the whole environment. Are your users in a hurry? Might they miss a sign in the station? Perhaps need some additional signage in the train. And lastly, design accordingly, so place signs where users can actually read them. Okay, so that's the offline part. So now let's get on to the online part. This is another experience that I have pretty much every month. So I don't know if anybody here has children that are in the New York City public schools, but if you do, you possibly have had this experience. When the school sends home a lunch menu every month. And it's very important to know what is going to be on the lunch menu, because if you remember what school lunch was like, 50% of the time you don't want to eat, tortilla stew or whatever it is that they're serving. So you need to know in advance in order to pack the lunch so your child doesn't starve. So they send home a lunch menu. For some reason, the school doesn't send it home until like the 4th day of the month. So you have basically the first 3 days where you have no idea what's for lunch. And there's always that panic on the first day of the month when you realize the old lunch menu has expired and you need to go find the new lunch menu. So I know it's online somewhere. So usually what I do is I start with the local school, because that's the site that I'm familiar with. So my goal here is find out what's for lunch. And I always get here and I remember, right, it's not on this site. There is actually something that says school food over there, doesn't have the school lunch menu. So then my next stop is usually nyc.gov, because that's really the next thing I can think of. I don't expect to find it here. There's nothing here that says school lunch, but I do see something that says city agencies, so I can click on that. And this is actually a list of every single city agency that they've put in this drop-down menu. That said, it does kind of work. there's education department of all the way there at the bottom. So I can click on that. Okay, so now I'm at the Department of Education. And again, nothing that is meeting my goal here, nothing that says school lunch. Instead, I've got this giant school search at the bottom, so I'm thinking a possible theory is maybe I need to go to the local school site that way, so I click on that. I don't really know if I'm getting closer. I'm kind of, there's the school up there on the left, so I guess I'll click on that. And I'm now at a second site for the school that I didn't previously know existed. So this seems totally wrong. It seems like this is some kind of templated thing that somebody at some point decided would be a good idea. It doesn't really look used. It says, welcome to our new school portal, and there's like nothing here, so it feels kind of abandoned. So I'm just gonna back up. I'll go back to the Department of Ed, and the only thing I can think to do at this point is search. So I type in lunch. And this is actually, these are the search results. This is actually news about lunch. There's no lunch menu here. So at this point, I always do the same thing, which is I yell to my husband, hey, where'd you find the lunch menu last month? And he yells back, try the students tab. So I do that. And here it is. There's, if you click on, there we go, breakfast, lunch, and snack menus, you get the school lunch menu. So this was success, sort of, but overall it didn't really give me a really good feeling about how this site is structured, and I pretty much repeat this process every single month. So what could they have done to make this site work? Well, for starters, there's too much self-promotion and not enough thinking about why people come to this site. So there's this huge thing, this was actually a screenshot from February, there's this huge thing talking about what they're doing for, to honor Martin Luther King. There is nothing here that is talking to parents that says that they've given any thought at all to, my reasons for coming to the site. So how could it become a usable site? 3 key principles for user-centered design. Talk to your users. In this case, they could listen to what their users are already saying. They could, there are 311 logs that could be gone through. Surely people are calling in and have issues about the Department of Education, and one hopes they're cataloging. They could send home a flyer. We get flyers from the school constantly saying, this one has lice, that one has Fitz disease. They could send home a flyer that says, we're thinking about redoing our site. Here's a list of 20 things that we might want to put on it. Circle 5 that you're interested in. It would be really easy to solicit feedback, and parents would probably be happy to give it. 2 is look at the whole environment. So in this case, we're dealing with parents. Parents are tired and multitasking and doing a lot of other things. Whenever I'm trying to look for the school lunch menu, it's always morning and I'm doing a million things and trying to get to work, and my husband's trying to get to work, I'm trying to get the kids out the door. So, parents need stuff quickly. And then 3, design accordingly. So in this case, bringing important items to the surface, and maybe a school lunch app is a great idea. So with the AirTrain example and with the lunch menu example, these are 2 of, I could go on all day, basically. And as I started noticing these, and every time I interact with the city online, I just keep feeling like, what is it? Why can't they get it right? Like, is there some kind of actual systemic thing going on? And it really comes down to this. The city's approach ignores the most important aspect of creating a digital entity: the people who live here. It's actually kind of codified a little bit in this roadmap for the digital city. This was introduced about 1.5 years ago, and this is the city's plan for how they're going to become digital. It looks like this. This is really nitpicky, but it's a roadmap and it's a circle, but I won't go there. So just to really quickly go through it. So this is their focus, this is their plan. So the plan is concentrate on industry, and what that means is building a tech sector, which is fine, but it doesn't actually have anything to do with connecting people to government. Engagement, a citizen-centric digital experience. So this feels like the part where maybe people are involved, except that it turns out,
It's not a Studio X event until the wall has.
So that sounds like maybe that's where they're involving citizens, except that when you read into it, some of it is sort of what you would hope for. It involves redesigning nyc.gov, which is good. A lot of it is we're going to have a Facebook page, we're going to have Foursquare badges, we're going to tweet. And then access internet connectivity for all is Wi-Fi in the park kind of thing, which again, fine, but doesn't have anything to do with really using technology to connect citizens to government. So the last one, open government, is sort of where the focus of a lot of effort has been. And just briefly, for people who don't know, that essentially means it's open data, and it basically means opening up all of the government data for developers to come in and do what they want with it. And the idea is that they'll have really, give it to the people and they'll have really good ideas. So, what's that gotten us so far? Well, one thing it got us is Rotify. So Rotify was the winner of one of the earlier big apps contests, and it got a lot of press. And it's an app that does multiple things, but the one thing that it's known for is that you can find a parking space with it. So, which sounds great. Unfortunately, it doesn't. This is actually a shot from a couple days ago of, I've told it to tell me all of the parking spaces that are available in a large chunk of Manhattan. So either there are no parking spaces available in all of Manhattan, which I suppose is plausible, or people aren't using the app. This is also an app that, and part of why it doesn't work is that it doesn't take into account how people are actually going to use it. So in order for there to be data, your process has to be, I'm pulling out of a parking space, I am thinking about where I'm going, I'm buckling my seatbelt, I've got the guy, who's pulled up next to my car and is motioning, are you pulling out? And in the middle of that, I'm supposed to remember to pull out my phone and mark where the parking space is. So that's not likely user behavior. So Rotify does other things as well. It also has a train schedule, and it gets a lot of press for this as well. The train schedule it's nice, it's fine. The only issue is that when you probably want to use it is underground, and you would not be able to access it. So in addition to Rotify, my personal favorite that's come out of these apps contests is Train Smokers. Train Smokers was submitted, it wasn't a winner. It was submitted for one of the MTA app contests, and it was to find the smoking car on the Long Island Railroad. So it seems to be now defunct. But this is a lot of, these are kind of the examples of things that you can get with open data. And that's in a large part because, it's just basically being thrown out there. So who's getting digital right? So this is Boston. Boston has a totally different approach. What Boston is doing is they basically started with the user. So they took a look at what the three biggest issues are in Boston. What they wanted to do was use technology to make people's lives easier, which was a really admirable goal. And they went about that by finding out, well, what are the three things that right now are making people's lives difficult? They talked to city agencies, they talked to the Boston equivalent of 311, they talked to citizens, and what they found out was that potholes, graffiti, and streetlights were the three things that really bothered people in Boston. And then what they did with that was they built something called Citizens Connect. So Citizens Connect, when you go to the App Store and look at the reviews for Citizens Connect, this is like, people love this app. It's one review after another that is just a love letter to the city of Boston for creating this app. So it's essentially, it's now expanded, but it started out as potholes, a way for people to report potholes, streetlights, and graffiti. And to watch it in action is just to watch this running dialogue of citizens reporting issues and the government responding to them. And one of the things that they do beautifully on here is that you can actually see when things are fulfilled. So, for example, we've got opened an hour ago via iPhone, opened 2 hours ago, and then below that closed 2 hours ago. So you can actually see that the government is responding to what people are saying. I also happen to just love that what people are reporting are that there's an extra utility pole up at the top. I don't know that a New York version of this would have that as one of the top concerns, but regardless, it works really well. People have been really happy with it. So what should New York City be doing instead? Again, back to the 3 principles. Talk to your users and citizens. Understand what the top quality of life issues are for New Yorkers. I don't know if they're potholes and graffiti or something entirely different, but surely that it's not hard to find. We have 311, we can look at what the logs are. New Yorkers are very vocal. I'm sure that they're constantly emailing to the government or to the city and are more than happy to share what they think the quality of life issues are. Look at the whole environment. Don't make apps just to make an app. This is a big one. So the city of Boston didn't start out with, hey, let's make an app. They started out with, what can we do to improve people's lives with technology? And they ended up with an app. New York is tending to start more with, let's have a Facebook page, as opposed to, and let's make some apps instead of, what do people really need? If it turns out to be, if the need gets translated into an app, that's fine, but that's not the starting point. And then lastly, design accordingly. And if we can get someone to do that, Digital New York might make everyone's lives a little easier. We can all go do yoga in Times Square.
Great, thank you. And hopefully there won't be an app for Times Square yoga. Thank you very much, Hannah. I have to say, I really found when you wrote that piece for Fast Company, this was so refreshing because when New York City started this whole apps competition thing 2 or 3 years ago, and they opened the New York City Data Mine, which was this open data resource that they thought would drive all this innovation. I just remember looking at it and saying, that is 79 data sets from the 79 agencies, from the 79 poor souls who were stuck there on Friday, the day that the deadline came in, that they had to submit a data set from their agency. And I wrote a blog post calling, I think it said something like, New York City's data mine is a data dump. And of course you're going to get useless apps when that's how you drive the whole process, so I appreciate the message. That said, it's been a few years now since the city embarked on what is now culminated in this digital roadmap, and they've had access to a lot of other innovations that have been coming from other cities, and I think have gotten smart enough to know a good thing when they see it. And one of the good things that they saw was a project that Jake Barton from Local Projects started, I think in 2010, Give a Minute, with CEOs for cities. They started in Chicago and then rolled it out in a couple other cities, and I'll let Jake talk about that and his work.
Great, thank you. So that was a robust critique. I don't actually work for the city, so I have lots of insights, and I'm happy to share them. We can sort of talk about some of the structural ways that, I don't know, cities in general work, although I think they do generally work in similar ways, but we can certainly talk about the specifics to New York to the extent that I'm aware of them, because I think it's easy to be critical of any institution from the outside, but of course, the reality is that there's a lot of legacy issues, there's structural issues, and there's no end to challenges for any large institution. You can look from the corporate world, a company like Nokia, which has gone from the top to the absolute bottom, all with lots and lots of years of advance notice, lots and lots of people have noticed, and like, wow, we're really messing up. Well, there goes a little more market share, and wow, we're crumbling even worse. I mean, in Sony, the same thing. There's no end to examples of very large institutions that have these types of failures, and of course, cities have many structural challenges. That being said, we actually don't work directly for the city. My company actually does mostly interpretive experiences for museums and for public spaces. We did a lot of work for the 9/11 memorial, the entire digital suite that was associated with the memorial itself, and the museum we're also designing, which opens next year underground. So we're highly aware and sort of part of developing digital applications for the urban fabric. Something like this, the 9/11 Memorial and then Museum, is a far, far easier problem to solve because you have a much more singular user base showing up to do something, right? They're at the memorial. They're there to have an interpretive experience, a memorial experience. They might be searching for something or looking for something. I won't go into the Memorial Finder application that we created or the algorithm that we made with Jared Thorpe, which actually arranged the name on the memorial itself, but that's a far simpler problem to solve. It's far more emotional, it's far more complex and rich in some ways in terms of storytelling, but in terms of your user base, you have a far more narrow issue. We're also doing the Eisenhower Memorial with Frank Gehry Partners, so this opens in 2015, and we're doing a whole digital infrastructure around Eisenhower and essentially turning a lot of the stories that will be literally engraved into the stone of the memorial itself into springboards for different digital experiences for people to connect through, to learn through, we have everything from games to participatory experiences. So we'll really be a sort of next generation understanding of what a memorial can be. And 9/11 has a lot of that type of approach as well. But the first project we started has a lot of bearing on Change by Us, and that's StoryCorps. And StoryCorps is a National Oral Histories project. It launched here in New York City, Grand Central Terminal. We now have booths in San Francisco as well as Atlanta, and we have 2 mobile booths. And essentially, you go into a booth in public space, you interview a subject for 45 minutes, you leave with a copy of the interview, and then a copy goes to the Library of Congress. So it's essentially a way to make a national oral histories project one conversation at a time. And we've done over 30,000 interviews so far. It actually is, the not-for-profit is located in Brooklyn. And so this is the beginning of my career with local projects, was building these types of experiences for dialogue. Now again, this is a very, very narrow definition of dialogue, and it's highly, you would say, artificial. It's very designed, right? You're going there, you have to bring your grandmother, you make this assignment in advance, you have to bring somebody, you do the interview itself. There's a whole process that we designed by which you prepare yourself for that experience. And so there's a lot of very specific touch points to actually make an experience out of it. But you can, you contrast that with the urban experience, and actually it was a project like StoryCorps that led a urban think tank called CEOs for Cities to come to us and ask us to look at the problem of urban participation. And so when we first heard about this, we did a lot of research into how cities communicate, right? And the typical way that you get urban participation, or you get any type of dialogue or conversation about how cities are going to evolve, is through a community meeting. So I went to Flickr, being a good user interaction designer, and did some research in terms of how people are communicating today. If you put community meeting into Flickr, this is essentially what you get. You get the powers that be make some sort of a speech or some sort of a presentation, and people are listening blankly, and then someone gets up and asks a very pointed question, and then whoever the board member is or whomever gets very hot under the collar. And typically this person gets interrupted in the back, right? Someone's yelling, and then someone yells back at this person, and then these people can't even get a word in edgewise, and this person has an idea, and then this person has a challenge to it, and he goes there, and then they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right? And then this lady shows up. Right? And this is always the way that these meetings tend to work. And as an interaction designer, we actually look at something like this and see that the structure of these meetings are necessarily producing conflict. Right? You take 2 microphones, you face them at each other, and you ask people to comment on an open plan. Of course, there's going to be lots and lots of conversation about what isn't working and is working, going back and forth. I also heard a really interesting anecdote around the same time that really framed for us the opportunity, which was about Detroit. Now, Detroit is famously now the sort of poster child for failing American cities. There are actually a lot of cities that are arguably doing worse, not at that scale, but that are actually doing worse than Detroit, if you can imagine it. Anyways, within the midst of this, I heard a story about a citizens group in Detroit that is essentially taking matters into its own hands in a variety of ways. So they're going out and they're planning a park themselves, right? They are providing security to their neighborhood, and they're actually going out and painting infrastructure. And the guy was telling me a story that on Saturdays they literally block off parts of highways and get on ladders, and they're painting overpasses. And one time a police officer came by and was stopping them and asking them, what are you doing here? Clearly it's like private citizens, it's a fellow, being very earnest, got down, sort of explained himself well over this group, and he could sort of see the look on the police officer's face, kind of trying to process what exactly was happening, and he's thinking to himself. And finally, the police officer says to him, "Thanks so much, I really appreciate it." He actually, let him go, basically let him carry on with his ways. And of course, in some ways you think, wow, that's an incredible story. But for my standpoint, the question is, why does it take a crisis for people to collaborate together? Right? And that actually brings us to Change by Us, which is essentially a platform for collaboration around shared urban values. So this is sort of inspiration film that we created early on, this idea that you go around the city, you could put stickies up with different ideas. It was basically playing with a lot of these ideas around crowdsourcing and innovation, where groups of people are gathering together different ideas, they can vote ideas up or down. This is sort of a classic way to think about groups of people. And if you think about the internet, it's kind of interesting because there's lots and lots of ways that you probably can imagine online to organize if you're interested in Dungeons and Dragons, or if you're interested in Mad Men, or if you're interested in any type of thematic idea or interest. It's actually pretty hard to imagine how do you actually collaborate with your neighborhood, right? There are lots of players who are trying to make dents in this space, but no one's really nailed it yet. And people are catching on to the fact that in like one of the world's great ironies, it's really easy to collaborate with someone with a shared interest in Tokyo, but actually really hard to talk to your neighbor with whom you have, of course, really concrete shared interests. And cities ostensibly offer that infrastructure, but as you can see, not very well. So for us, we got involved and launched Change by Us this past summer. Mayor Bloomberg on Earth Day as part of the Plan NYC. And what's interesting is that Plan NYC, of course, was the sustainability platform for New York City. It launched during the first administration's, first term of the Bloomberg administration to some fanfare. The second launch was not nearly as well reported, and that's because it's really tough to drive press with these types of goals, right? These are actually the types of things that really make massive quality of life differences for all of us. They're exactly the type of thing you want government to do, and it's exactly the thing that people don't generally think about or care about or pay attention to, right? So waterways, building water infrastructure, cleaning up brownfields, that's clearly something that government can do. But if you look at solid waste, divert 75% of our solid waste from landfills as a goal, that's composting, right? And that's actually nothing that the government can do. Beyond the fact of the question whether they should do it or not. That's something that all of us need to do. And in fact, the Bloomberg administration got us involved because they learned during the first Plan NYC how important grassroots organizing was. And that's because they had lots and lots of failures associated with it. The most spectacular failure was congestion pricing, which they tried to launch with great fanfare. And they got the Times, they got the Post, they got politicians lining up end to end supporting it. But because there was no popular support, but lots of popular resentment, it ended up failing. Right? So Bloomberg administration, not stupid, they recognize, wow, I get it. Okay, this is why politicians build and connect with grassroots efforts. And so Change by Us is really trying to become a way to essentially facilitate grassroots to make something like Plan NYC applicable at all these different scales. Not a way to basically replace government. Government is going to do stuff that government should do, and there's not many people who make the argument that government shouldn't be cleaning up brownfields or building water infrastructure. Even the Tea Party, I think, would probably agree, yes, well, the government actually probably needs to do that at a certain level. But there is obviously stuff that government wants to have happen, sustainability being part of it, that they can't actually achieve. And so that's really where Change by Us comes into. And it builds off this phrase that Tim O'Reilly sort of kicked off that a lot of people have championed, this idea of the city as a platform. So you mentioned iPhone, and the idea here is essentially New York City wants to do stuff. They don't know exactly how to do it, so they're going to set the circumstances and provide the incentives by which individual citizens will make these things a reality. And bring this in the context of crowdsourcing, which is how we launched. It actually works in an interesting way, right? Because what happens is you ask for crowdsourcing and people put in answers. And outside of a few answers that are out there, the ideas are actually relatively consistent and actually not particularly innovative. And what you really learn when you look at this stuff is that really the answers to making New York City better are relatively known, particularly in terms of sustainability, but across the board. right? They're known, but they're not activated because of a lack of agency, a lack of coordination, a lack of resources. And so what you see here is the way for community groups to essentially post and to have their work amplified by the city and by Change by Us through grants and through facilitation, through connection with the city itself. And one of the best examples of this is the fact that there's literally like over a dozen different groups doing composting in New York City. And that makes perfect sense because, of course, different neighborhoods need their own composting group because they're dealing with their own populations, their own challenges in terms of geography and in terms of capacity. And so in this case, it's a group in Brooklyn, Sustainable Flatbush, that deals also with a group in Queens, a group in Manhattan, a group in Harlem, a group in Staten Island. They're able to share their techniques in terms of actually pushing composting forward. I talk about the platform a lot as a way to amplify different work. So $50,000 in mini grants from Rockefeller Foundation put in and basically spurred all this type of activity, both in terms of the users, and in terms of the projects, and in terms of the media impression, in terms of amplifying that voice. And the question is, what does change look like? Right? So this is a good example. The types of projects that come out of Change by Us. These are the compost bins themselves. Right? Community garden, adding wood chips. This is not a massive innovation. This is not like a world-changing way to make cities better. This is pretty much a known quantity, but what you really need is people. And so this, arguably, is a far, far more effective way for the city of New York to get out its sustainability message, not so much putting out the big report, expecting the press to make a story out of it, because there's no story there, but to actually put it in the hands of the grassroots and to host an event like this, which has food and music and neighbors getting together and just talking about composting and how exactly it works. Because this also then, of course, drives this, and this is how people understand and gather information about the world today, is through social media itself. So actually spurring and supporting the grassroots is, I would argue, super critical in terms of meeting your goals. We have big plans for Change by Us. We're hoping to get some type of corporate sponsorship in which you could get certainly some type of national store or organization, in this case a coffee group, to be able to completely localize its store by actually connecting directly with community groups in that area, right? Because that's one thing that digital technology does very well. You can volunteer here for the efforts themselves. We actually just closed out our round of mini grants at end of April. And just to show you at the end, this is my favorite organization out of Change by Us. This is Brook Park Chickens. So they took their $700 mini grant and created what they called chicken deputies. It's like the world's greatest phrase. We actually got Mayor Bloomberg to say that, which was a huge coup. And honestly, the chicken deputies in the South Bronx chickens, first of all, they live this hilariously idyllic life, which I adore. But beyond that, they've gotten a mad amount of press that definitely, hands down, got far more press than Plan NYC itself. Right? Because who doesn't want to talk about chickens? These great chickens, and the kids are taking care of them. They're tweeting that, their Twitter account, right? But then I think this, in the end, is really the legacy of something like a grassroots organization, is that it has exactly what you're talking about in terms of making connections with different audiences, and it does it because it's specifically very small, very local. It has the types of connections with an individual neighborhood, and is powered by individual personalities, and is able to create these types of experiences. Right? That's something that the city of New York cannot, never will actually produce. No city, no organization of any scale is going to make something this custom tailored to any individual neighborhood, nor can it, nor will it. Right? And that's corporations to institutions to the city. On the other hand, using a platform, it can again work essentially to spur innovation in these very, very small local ways. This happens to be a really unique type of application, but there's tons and tons again of like small composting groups, small community gardens. And indeed, supporting that is exactly how you make the city of New York a more sustainable place. And also, the Bloomberg administration is very smart about trying to build up a legacy that will last beyond them. And that legacy is not just going to be in terms of the types of infrastructure they build, it's also in terms of the types of people that they inspire. And that's all of us. So with that, I will say thanks so much.
Great. How do you want to take some questions?
Great.
If I can just maybe kick it off. I think it was really interesting how both of you started out talking about physical interfaces, whether it was the sort of navigating the art train or these interactive museum experiences that you designed, Jake. I guess my question is thinking about it as apps as sort of the cutting edge of how governments engage citizens, is that misguided? Should we be thinking about interactive experiences that sort of span both the virtual and the physical realm?
I think that's a really interesting point. I think depending on the actual application, there's a lot of good arguments to be made that, you know, cities essentially have physical information structures, they're just not scalable, right? Those are the post-it boards, that's the way that people put up notices in their neighborhood. I mean, all those conventions exist and have existed and exist in different ways in cities but are replicated. There's this big participatory budgeting exercise that's going on in different boroughs right now, and the city itself, City Hall is not supporting it, but individual council members are doing this, and students of mine at SVA were designing interfaces around exactly that, like how would you actually really engage people in participatory budgeting, and a lot of it was by layering these interfaces into the physical infrastructure, meaning, you know, participatory budgeting is super abstract, and you're here in this like weird gymnasium talking, etc. But if you were to walk to your park or onto the corner and see a sign in front of a basketball court and be like, will you support me? I mean, it's like physicalized Kickstarter, right? Will you support me? Do you like me? Do you care for me? Text this in, right? I mean, that's essentially what you want to do within participatory budgeting, I think, is spur people's participation, both in terms of competition, but also in terms of just concrete connection. I care about these things. I mean, to a certain extent, that's what the Pothole app is doing. And I think, you know, so thinking about physicalized interfaces, I think, would be really smart. The problem always is just maintenance and money. You know, it's really hard to afford those things. It's really hard to sustain those things. And apps, because, I mean, one of the things that Apple has done so smartly is essentially absorb all of the infrastructure costs, right? Like if you launch a website, you have to keep paying for that server. If you launch an app, boom, it's out there. You never pay for anything again. You just reap the benefits in terms of people using it, and if they're paying for it, then you really reap the benefits. So that was like a super smart infrastructure investment that Apple made. But with physical infrastructures, you can only imagine. I mean, the city of New York has way too many headaches. They're already firing tons and tons of people in these budget crisis times. So committing to anything that would specifically screen for lots more maintenance is like a total non-starter for the city.
Don't feel like you have to. Well, are there questions from the audience? Yeah, we're here.
So thank you for both the presentation. I am an artist that's working in public space. I made a game that turns the city into playgrounds and people can dance in the street. I have two questions separately for both Hannah and Jake. For Hannah, it's a question about space, meaning different city will need different design. The design for Boston might not be the best for New York City. In such a city that there's a lot of tourists, who would you think that would be a good balance between the people passing by and the people really stays here as residents? And the question for Jake is about time. Many of your work is about building something that's memorizing an event, person, or a collective memory. When you're designing, what do you think? Who is the better person to talk about? Is it the past person, or is the present person that is trying to understand something in the past?
So I think that, I mean, they're two totally separate, you know, people who live in the city and tourists have completely different needs. So when I mean, you know, I guess my larger concern is that the city should be starting with, you know, to address the needs of its citizens first, which isn't to say that, you know, that the needs of tourists should, you know, obviously that's a huge industry, and there's probably a lot that can be done there. To some degree with, you know, the sort of mess that's out there, the way that New York is kind of representing itself digitally at the moment isn't probably not a great selling point for tourists. So, you know, they're definitely connected. But again, you know, they're very separate audiences with totally separate needs. So there's not going to be one overarching solution, I guess.
And I think in terms of your question about collective memory, so we do, like I said, a lot of different projects. Change Bias is in some ways an outlier because it's much more action-oriented and it's much more about collective action, although it has some dialogue aspects. I think in terms of the The other projects are doing the interpretive ones. It really depends on what the project's about. So we have some projects that are about the past, some projects that are about people in the present reflecting on the past. I think in this case, you know, the biggest challenge is just spurring people into action. If you look at the Popple, you know, Reporter, or if you look at See, Click, Fix, which is the grandfather of all of those platforms where people are complaining about stuff, or you look at Neighborland, which is sort of like a version of Change by Us where people are saying, I'd like to see this, I'd like to see that. They're super popular, except with cities, right? Cities don't like them because it's just making more work for them, and they're broke. So that's the problem with these apps, is that it's actually really easy to get people to participate if they're going to complain and do nothing, or if they're going to ask for new stuff and not pay for it or do it, right? So there's a reason why those things are not widely embraced by many cities, is because cities don't like them. And the reason cities don't like them is because they're not connecting any revenue to them. It's very easy for people to complain. I mean, we don't like to walk around and be, fix that, fix that, fix that, fix that, right? And that is the model, the broken model of cities for the past few decades. It's like the business model. Yeah, you have cities calling their citizens customers. We're going to deliver, right? Like customers. That makes no sense. And we just don't have the revenue for it anymore.
Well, although Boston was able to do that app on the $25,000 budget.
It's not building the app. It's actually fixing the potholes. It's the problem. It's basically, people don't like See, Click, Fix because it's producing an expectation that the city's going to lick and split.
Right.
Like as if there's an information bottleneck for the city to fix itself. There's no information bottleneck. There's a resources bottleneck.
Well, you know what's really interesting? If you listen to Bill Oates, the CIO of Boston, talk about Citizens Connect, the story that he always uses is this story about how there was somebody who, you know, posted an issue on Citizens Connect that there was a possum in their trash can.
Right.
And the story that he tells then is a great story of government offloading of obligations, because before the city could even roll their animal control truck, the ticket was closed by somebody else who said they went and tipped over the thing and the possum ran out. And who knows if this even happened, but like the way that he talks about Citizen Connect is always with that story.
Yeah.
And it's always the story, you know, that resonates with exactly the issues that you're talking about.
Right.
It's like, the government doesn't have to provide the services because we're going to short circuit, you know, like peer-to-peer service delivery.
Right. And the reality is, Change by Us is trying to spur citizens to do what citizens are good at doing, which is community gardens. So sustainability works for that, but for health, there's lots of community-led initiatives that would make people much healthier. They also provide more safety, they provide more efficiency. I mean, there's a lot of things that citizens can do, and the government has great interest in creating a platform to spur that type of change. I just feel like when I look at the successful apps, particularly like See, Click, Fix or like the Boston thing, again, it's not tough to get people to complain. It's tough to get people to actually produce. And cities don't have an end to the things that they need to work on already. So, like when we were working on Change by Us, we met with 311. Hey, we're gonna get data together, and they were just like, if you send us any more tickets, we will kill you. Like that's 311's problem, is they have too many complaints already.
Yeah, but I mean that's also because there's no other avenue for you know, a lot of those complaints are things that could be solved and you could just look up somewhere very easily, you know, what alternate side of the street parking is.
Yeah. But it's not about information. It's about literally complaining, or about, you know, producing tickets for the city to fix. I mean, that's the larger problem.
I think one, I mean, that's really curious, and obviously cities are, you know, like you started out with, cities have these, you know, infrastructural problems, these systemic problems, and, you know, clearly one way to solve them is to devolve responsibility onto citizens to solve their own problems, or form groups to solve their own problems. Another way to solve them is to make things that are attractive to nonprofits or grant-making organizations or corporations with money to spend, deal with it that way. Like, here's some friendly, low-hanging fruit for Starbucks to support, you know, and take it out of the city's hands. The other thing that I wonder whether a digital app could do, and I don't know if you've seen any examples of this, is literally connect, and it slightly ties into the participatory budgeting thing, but like connect people to why things might not be working.
Totally. That's the magic bullet.
Because it might be because the companies aren't paying tax in the city, or it might be because, you know.
And nobody wants to hear that.
Right.
I mean, that's the city has this massive, I don't think it's a app problem, they have a communications problem. I mean, the number one complaint for Bloomberg is the subways. He's like, I don't run the subways. Talk to the governor. You know, like every day, the subways, blah, blah. He's like, I don't run the subways. Yell at Cuomo. You know, but there's this perception that because he's Bloomberg, he can do X, Y, or Z, and that's a communications problem.
But that seems like something that you make these pretty apps that give the sense that we all have agency, which is great. But there are situations where there isn't agency.
Definitely.
Is anyone building those into apps? Like, wah, wah, sorry, like, this is the system, it's fucked up. Now, you know?
Yeah, there's actually some great transit apps. There's like a whole genre of transit apps that are called How Fucked Is the Whatever Line. And Boston has some, the orange line, there's one for the L train here, and it just pulls real-time, arrival data off of the website, and particularly like highlights it when it's, going to be a long time, like the example I'm going to show.
Yeah.
There's a question here.
Yes, I mean, kind of jumps off the discussion you're having, but I was wondering about the shelf life of apps as a platform to activate grassroots activity, because if people are constantly like sending things through in the hope that possible get out of the bin, eventually, I mean, I already feel like there's crowdsourcing fatigue. Like if I get another friend sending me a Kickstarter request, so I'm not saying that, so I think that platform is going to fall over, but what do both of you think it might start to begin to transform into, or where is this going to go? Because it feels like there might be a saturation point where people, how do you even start to attract the crowd to crowdsource from?
Right.
There's so many of these what do you call them? Proliferation.
No, I mean, I think from our standpoint, people in a neighborhood are always going to have a vested interest. It's just really hard to crack that nut. It's hard to figure out how to get those people to coordinate with each other, particularly in a city that's as big as New York. I tell you, where crowdsourcing works really good is in the small cities. Because there's less to do and there's less competition. We launched the precursor to Change by Give a Minute in Memphis and Chicago, and got an equal amount of participation, even though Chicago's literally like 8 times as big. And that's because the mayor of Memphis was like, I love this platform. He's not wrong a minute. He didn't have a whole lot of else going on, so he was like digging it. He really promoted it and used it a lot, very well for his administration. So I think that's another challenge, particularly in a city like New York, and in some ways it doesn't surprise me that New York has so many of the challenges that you were describing. New York's just a lot bigger and a lot more complicated than other cities. So, I mean, that doesn't excuse it, because a lot of the city problems are typical, one to the next. But the fact that there is this massive, swollen, arguably, bureaucracy is also just a reflection of the fact that we're the largest city in America. We have a 24-hour transit system. I mean, it's a big, complicated mess out there.
Yeah, I wanted to riff on that. Just ask Hannah to expand a little bit on the your last slide. And if Rachel Stern, the chief digital officer for New York, called you up tomorrow and said, "How should I redesign big apps for?" Because they're the only city still doing big apps contests. What would you do differently? I mean, they have been listening, but they're only listening to developers. How do you get them to listen to a larger
I mean, I think there shouldn't be big apps for. I don't think it's not anything that's conducive to getting, producing anything that's useful. Just because it totally leaves out users and user needs. It's just if you put a bunch of developers in a room and say, hey, come up with something, they automatically become not users. They become developers in a room looking at data. They're not going to be, it's not the same as going through the actual process of talking to people and finding out what those needs are.
Right. The biggest challenge for cities or for government in general is not necessarily the scale, right? Because there's big corporations, probably bigger corporations, that actually do a good job, if not a great job, of listening to their consumers and providing materials for them, whatever those materials are, right? Like big things can do that. American Airlines does quite well in terms of facilitating its customer relationship. The big challenge is that the needs are far more heterogeneous than a typical commercial enterprise. And then the other big problem is there's no commercial pressure on those cities to deliver their services, right? Like if you're American Airlines, I'm a UX designer, right? And the city's actually redesigning its website right now. NYC.gov is being redesigned. But you can imagine how the meetings go. I'm contracted, and I declined to bid on it because it was such a nightmare, but you're contracted to meet with all 50 million city agencies and to listen to them and listen to what they want, and that's your client. You're there to serve those people. Now, that's actually not really who you're building the site for, right? You're really building the site for the people who use it. But the challenge is that the institutions don't necessarily have the commercial pressure to require them to listen to their customers, right? Like that's the stick that UX people like us use to beat our clients into actually listening to their users. Well, you know, if you just build it for yourself, people aren't going to use it and you'll be a commercial failure.
Well, but I mean, there are actually, you know, financial benefits to having things work. For
of course.
311 is a great example. I mean, if there was a way, and you know, and I don't work in government. I work exclusively with corporate sites and whatnot, and have had the experience of working with a lot of very large corporations, and typically, you know, there is somebody who ultimately will listen to, okay, well, if we don't do X, we're going to lose revenue, and you know, but the same argument can be made for a lot of things with the city. So, you know, with 311, it costs money, and if there were things that could be done to eliminate people calling in, which it sounds like they desperately need, and you know, if there's an app that will cut that by 10% or whatever it is, then I mean, again, I'm not in those meetings, but I would hope that somebody would respond to that. No. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not cynically aware of it, but I think that is the reality is, you know, I mean, if you go to Citibank's website, it's a total catastrophe. You go to any big website, it's a disaster because the needs are so incredibly heterogeneous, and the heterogeneity of the needs from the user standpoint are reflected in the diversity of all these vertical silos. In a city is totally that, you know, multiplied by many, many powers of 10.
I mean, it seems like part of the problem is how do you do market research around an audience for a cross-cutting tool that doesn't even exist yet? So it's like compounded on all of the obstacles that you're talking about. There's one over here.
So I have two questions, like one kind of nuts and bolts and one more abstract. I guess my nuts and bolts questions are, what are the flavors of political resistance that you get to transparency, to resisting, to releasing certain data sets? Like, are there particular reasonings behind them? And I guess, do you find that there's conflicts between these user-driven, like see, click, fix kind of models of bug reporting, essentially, and protocols that are already in place? Like Hannah, you went into the DOE website, and I really appreciate that. I work for DOE. So that template site that you pulled up, if you click around enough, you'll find like the most recent physical inspection for the building for your school. And like that whole process is I don't know how we could possibly transition from that periodic engineer goes out there, writes a bunch of stuff, rates stuff from 1 to 5, and like a more user-driven model. I have no idea, you know. And kind of, so there's a nuts and bolts question about political resistance and like existing protocols. And number 2, what advice would you get from someone who's on the inside and like desperately wants to change it? You know, the UX issues and our own internal software you don't want to have. Like, so the website is good compared to.
So I'm just curious though now that I have someone I can ask the questions about. So why are the building reports on that site?
There's a bunch of that's kind of like this weird backend stuff. You can get a lot of like that's where department like dumps like your technical stuff. I mean, the only one I ever access is building reports, and like how you have to whenever you want to see a school lunch menu, you have to ask somebody. Like I have to ask somebody if I want to see like. Like,
I mean,
so, I don't know. I mean, it's different users too. Like, I'm a different user than you are. Like, and I get pushed at the same time. It's weird.
Right. I mean, I think in terms of building consensus for change there, you know, again, just looking at whatever your version of the bottom line is, the fact that there are people who, you know, I'm sure that the DOE goes completely nuts when it's time to apply it to schools, and the phones, I'm sure, are insane, and a lot of that is because that information gets disseminated to parents anyway, in a very strange way, and there's not some central repository for it. So, you know, I think the times when people in your office are being overwhelmed, you know, if a complete redesign of the site isn't something that is going to happen for whatever reason, you know, maybe there are small changes that can be made, and maybe there are sitelets or whatever it is that can be built to meet very specific needs that you know that you can anticipate. So you know that in May, when the school admission stuff comes out, the phone lines go bananas. You know, maybe there's a small thing that can be built to fix that.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, I think,
Little tools for little situations if you can't get, like, fix the big stuff.
yeah, I mean, my experience with the city is that the people are really smart and they're equally frustrated by everything that people on the outside are. I mean, a lot of it's resources, and honestly, you know, if we think it's bad now, wait until we get a next mayor who really doesn't understand digital at all. I mean, Bloomberg is like in New York, within these administrations is arguably the golden age, right? You have a mayor who understands this, and you have, you know, the most financially successful city, particularly in America, certainly at this scale. So I don't know, you know, it's only downhill from here. That's the bad news, right? I mean, just looking at it that way, maybe, I mean, I don't want to be a pessimist, but, you know, Bloomberg is pushing a redesign of .gov, and the people who are doing it are smart, they're very committed, they're trying their best. And they're trying their best within a very complicated landscape. I mean, you mentioned the political pressures on releasing data. I don't work for the city, but I've overheard or been privy to conversations. It's a nightmare, right? Because you have all these political agencies who are being told by a separate silo, oh, release data, and they're just like, well, let's pick the only thing we won't get in trouble for.
Yeah.
And that's what they release. And not surprisingly, that doesn't produce very interesting applications.
On the other hand, I think a lot of what's wrong with what Hannah pointed out, that's typical of this administration, is that they haven't even moved into the Web 2.0 model. They're still just publishing documents.
Yes.
I mean, that's what's wrong with all these sites, is they're document dumps,
right.
And then they never listen to or gather any feedback on how the information is utilized.
Right, but that's, I mean, there is, you know, this administration in particular, but I think politics or government in general is in the low to no risk game. They're just not, there's no facility to take risks as the government. There's not a lot of incentive, there's only downside. And certainly within this administration, the only rule, particularly for the third term, is don't mess up. Don't mess up, just by all means, don't mess up. Don't do anything that will make us look bad. And so that plays into it.
Do you have another question, Nick?
No, I was just going to say actually that one thing that I think is kind of funny about a disastrous website, which if you want to see one, Columbia University GMAP's website is right up there, and apparently unfixable by anybody. And the new strategy, which is not my strategy and which I'm actually kind of interested in, is to gradually colonize the homepage of it with widgets. And so the rest, everything else is moved further and further and further down as like more and more widgets get added. And so now it sort of looks like a kind of like a semi-broken dashboard. But it's, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
like the widgets are more useful than whatever was there.
That's the theory. That's like the new theory, is how to get it actually fixed, because it's easier to get permission to make a widget for something than to change the architecture of the website. So I don't know.
That kind of sounds like government in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Even down to the widgets, like yeah.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank both of our guests and,
yeah, thank you so much.
for great presentations and engaging discussion. Thank you.